I signed the divorce papers at exactly 11:42 a.m. I remembered the time because I kept staring at the clock on the wall behind Daniel's head, watching the second hand move in perfect mechanical circles. Steady, indifferent, unstoppable. Kind of like him. Kind of like the marriage we had built. 7 years. 7 years of dinners eaten alone. 7 years of smiling beside him at galas where he introduced me as my wife. Never Emily. 7 years of shrinking myself so he could feel taller. The office smelled like leather and expensive cologne. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the skyline. A city he loved to claim he had conquered. His company logo was etched into the glass wall behind him. Harper Technologies, his empire. He sat across from me, composed, confident, already emotionally checked out. The divorce papers lay between us like a contract closing a failed merger. In his world, everything was a transaction. Even love. You understand the terms, his lawyer had said earlier, sliding the documents toward me with a rehearsed tone of detached professionalism. Given the prenuptial agreement, there will be no claim to company equity or assets acquired prior to the marriage. Of course there wouldn't. Daniel made sure of that. The prenup had been non-negotiable. At the time, I told myself it didn't matter. I wasn't marrying him for money. I had my own career, my own savings, my own identity. What I didn't tell him, what I had never told him, was that I had something much bigger than savings. I had walked away from billions. When Daniel met me, I was living in a 2-bedroom condo downtown. I worked as a strategic consultant. I dressed simply. I wore minimal jewelry. My last name, Carter, meant nothing to him. He never once asked about my family. Not seriously. He assumed I came from comfortable but ordinary. He liked that about me. He said it made me grounded. What he really meant was manageable. My father, Jonathan Carter, built Carter Global Holdings from the ground up. Energy, infrastructure, biotech, real estate, diversified across 3 continents. Our family name quietly sits behind projects people assume belong to governments. Net worth estimates vary. $9 billion, $12 billion, depending on the market. I stopped checking years ago because when I was 24, I made a decision. I didn't want to be the billionaire's daughter. I wanted someone to choose me, not my surname. So I left. Not dramatically, not angrily, just quietly. I told my father I needed to prove to myself that I could stand on my own. He didn't argue. He simply transferred a modest trust into a separate account, enough that I would never struggle, but not enough to scream wealth. If you ever need to come home, he said, you won't have to ask twice. I didn't think I ever would. Then I met Daniel. He was ambitious, sharp, charismatic. He talked about building something legendary, about disrupting industries, about not wanting to be small. I admired that hunger. He admired that I didn't challenge it. At first, we were partners, but slowly, success changed him. Or maybe it revealed him. As Harper Technologies grew, so did his ego. He began measuring worth in numbers, revenue, valuation, status. He corrected me in public, dismissed my ideas privately, traveled constantly without asking if I wanted to join. The first time he told me to stay in my lane, I laughed. The 10th time, I didn't. The last 2 years of our marriage weren't explosive. They were empty. Silence at breakfast. Separate calendars. Separate bedrooms because of stress. I knew he was emotionally gone long before the affair rumors reached me. And yes, there were rumors. Investors talk, assistants talk, drivers talk. I never confronted him. Not because I was weak, but because I was watching who he became when he thought he had won. When he asked for the divorce, he framed it like a mercy. "We've grown apart," he said, as if growth had nothing to do with ego. He expected tears, he expected negotiation, he expected fear. Instead, I requested 1 week to review the papers. Not because I needed legal advice. My family's legal team could dismantle his entire company in under 48 hours if I asked. But I needed to be certain. Not about leaving him, about returning home. Because going back meant something bigger than comfort. It meant admitting I had been wrong about love. The morning I walked into his office to sign, he looked almost relieved. "You'll be fine," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You're smart. You'll land on your feet. I'll make sure the settlement is fair." Fair. He was offering me a lump sum that wouldn't cover 1 month of operating costs at my father's smallest subsidiary. He genuinely believed he was being generous. I picked up the pen. For a brief second, my hand trembled. Not from fear of losing him, but from the weight of what he didn't know. The moment I signed, the power dynamic shifted, even if he couldn't see it yet. He thought I was walking away with nothing. In reality, I was stepping back into a world he would never survive in. I stood, adjusted my blazer, and looked at him. Really looked at him. One last time. "Take care of yourself, Daniel." He nodded, distracted, already reaching for his phone. As if I were just another file closed. 3 days later, I left the city quietly. No social media announcement, no dramatic farewell. Just the car waiting at the private terminal. When the jet doors closed and the engines roared to life, I allowed myself one deep breath. I wasn't escaping. I was returning. Back to the Carter estate. Back to the boardroom. Back to the family whose last name he never bothered to respect. Daniel Harper thought he had just finalized the divorce. He had no idea he had just declared financial war. And he was about to learn exactly who he had been married to. The Carter estate doesn't appear on maps. Technically, it has an address. But most GPS systems reroute visitors to the vineyards half a mile away. Privacy is a currency in our world, and we've always been very, very wealthy. As the jet descended, I stared out the window at the coastline below. Rolling green hills, private marina. The glass and stone mansion that had been my childhood home stood like something out of a film. Elegant, quiet, untouchable. I hadn't been back in almost 8 years. Not for holidays. Not for birthdays. Not even when my father had surgery 3 years ago. Distance had been my way of proving independence. Or maybe it had been pride. When the plane door opened, the familiar scent of ocean air hit me. Sharp, clean, grounding. A black car waited at the base of the steps. No paparazzi, no spectacle. Just Samuel, our family's head of security for over 20 years. He didn't smile widely. He never did. But his eyes softened. "Welcome home, Miss Carter." I swallowed. Miss Carter. Not Emily, not Daniel's wife. Carter. I wasn't sure I'd hear that again, I admitted quietly. He opened the car door. "Your father never stopped saying it." The drive up the private road felt longer than I remembered. Tall iron gates opened automatically. The estate staff lined discreetly near the entrance, not formally, not dramatically, just present. Waiting. When I stepped out of the car, the front doors opened before I could touch them. And there he was. Jonathan Carter, my father, older, slightly grayer, but still standing straight with that same steady presence that could silence a boardroom with a single glance. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I wasn't the CEO's daughter. I wasn't the woman who had walked away. I was just his child. "You look thinner," he said finally. I laughed through the tightness in my chest. "You look the same." "That's because I own the biotech companies that make sure I do." That was his way of breaking tension. Then he stepped forward and pulled me into a hug. Not stiff, not formal. Real. "You didn't fail," he said quietly, before I could say anything. "You lived." And just like that, something inside me unclenched. We didn't talk about Daniel that night. We had dinner in the private dining room overlooking the ocean. Just the two of us. No assistants, no executives, no agendas. But the next morning, the world shifted. At 8 a.m., I walked into Carter Global's executive boardroom for the first time in nearly a decade. Floor-to-ceiling screens displayed global market data. 12 board members sat around the table. Most of them had known me since I was in college. Some looked curious. Some looked cautious. One looked annoyed. Victor Lang, CFO, brilliant, arrogant, loyal to my father, but skeptical of me. "I wasn't aware you were returning permanently," he said coolly. "I wasn't aware I needed permission," I replied. Silence. My father didn't intervene. This was deliberate. He had built an empire. But he had always intended to hand it to someone. And everyone in that room knew I was the only heir. "I assume you're aware," Victor continued, tapping his tablet, "that Harper Technologies has been aggressively expanding into renewable infrastructure, one of our emerging sectors." My stomach tightened, but my face didn't move. Daniel, of course, he'd been chasing growth fast, too fast. "We've been monitoring them," Victor added. "High valuation, rapid debt accumulation, over-leveraged acquisitions." I leaned forward. "How exposed are they?" Victor's eyes sharpened. "Significantly." There it was, the first crack. Daniel had always loved risk. He called it vision. But vision without restraint is gambling. And from what I was hearing, he had been betting big. "Do we hold any indirect stakes?" I asked. Victor hesitated, glancing briefly at my father. "Yes. Of course we did." Carter Global had minority positions in two of Harper's debt-backed energy expansions. Through layered subsidiaries. Daniel had no idea. He never dug deep enough into ownership structures. He was too focused on headlines. "Keep monitoring," I said calmly. "But don't interfere." Victor studied me. "You're not planning something reckless, I hope." "No," I replied evenly. "I'm planning something patient." That afternoon, I moved into my old office on the east wing of headquarters. It hadn't been touched. My name was still etched faintly on the glass door. Emily Carter, Strategic Development. I ran my fingers over it. The girl who had left this office believed love was enough. The woman standing here now understood leverage. Over the next 6 weeks, I re-entered the company quietly. No press release, no public announcement, no dramatic billionaire daughter returns headlines. Internally, however, everything shifted. I reviewed portfolios, reassessed vulnerable assets, strengthened divisions Daniel was trying to enter. I learned something critical. Harper Technologies wasn't just expanding. It was bleeding cash. Daniel had financed rapid acquisitions through short-term credit lines tied to projected future valuations. As long as the market believed in him, he stayed afloat. But belief is fragile, and markets are ruthless. One bad quarter, one regulatory delay, one major investor pulling out. That's all it would take. 3 months after I returned home, I received a message from a mutual acquaintance. Daniel's hosting a private investor summit next week. Rumor is he's seeking emergency capital. Emergency. I stared at the screen for a long time. He had divorced me believing I was disposable, believing I brought nothing to the table, believing he was untouchable. And now he was scrambling. I didn't smile. I didn't feel vindictive. What I felt was clarity. Because here's what Daniel never understood. I never needed his money. I never needed his name. I had walked into that marriage already powerful. I had simply chosen not to use it. But power doesn't disappear. It waits. And the moment he decided I was replaceable, he set the clock on his own collapse. What Daniel Harper didn't know yet was that the capital he desperately needed was sitting in the building he once mocked me for leaving. And this time, I wasn't shrinking. I was watching him fall. The first headline hit on a Tuesday morning. Harper Technologies delays Q3 report. Strategic restructuring. Cited in Daniel's world, strategic restructuring meant one thing: trouble. I was in my office when Victor walked in without knocking, which meant the situation had just crossed from interesting to significant. They missed earnings projections by 18%, he said, placing a tablet in front of me. 2 major investors pulled out of the Nevada solar acquisition. I scanned the numbers quickly. Over-leveraged, overexposed, overconfident. Exactly what I had expected. Daniel had built his empire on momentum, the illusion of unstoppable growth. But growth funded by short-term capital is like building a skyscraper on borrowed steel. Eventually, someone asks for it back. Liquidity? I asked. Tight, Victor replied. Very tight. If they don't secure fresh capital within 60 days, debt covenants trigger. Which meant forced asset liquidation. Which meant panic. Which meant vulnerability. I leaned back slowly. Has he approached us? Victor gave me a long look. Not directly. Of course not. Daniel would rather drown than ask me for help. But pride doesn't pay interest. That afternoon, I requested a full risk exposure analysis on all Carter-affiliated entities connected to Harper Technologies. Not to sabotage, not to attack, to understand. And the deeper we dug, the clearer the picture became. Daniel had made 3 critical mistakes. 1. He expanded into renewable infrastructure without securing long-term government guarantees. 2. He financed acquisitions through adjustable rate debt. 3. He assumed the market would always believe in him. Confidence had been his currency. Now it was evaporating. 2 weeks later, the second headline hit harder. Regulatory review. Halts Harper's Texas wind project. Stock dipped 11% in a single day. Then came the calls. Banks requesting collateral reassessments. Investors demanding emergency meetings. Suppliers shortening payment windows. I watched it unfold from a class office overlooking the Pacific. And for the first time since the divorce, I felt something unexpected. Not revenge, not satisfaction, sadness. Because I remembered the man who once stayed up until 3 a.m. sketching ideas on napkins. The man who dreamed big without calculating applause. Somewhere along the way, he stopped building for vision. He started building for dominance, and dominance is expensive. 3 days later, I attended a private economic forum in New York. High level, closed door, no media. Daniel was there. I hadn't seen him since the day I signed the divorce papers. He looked thinner, sharper, more restless. Success had always energized him. This was different. When he spotted me across the reception hall, his expression froze. Not anger, not affection, shock. Because I wasn't dressed like the ex-wife who walked away quietly. I was wearing Carter blue, a subtle but unmistakable signature shade within our corporate circles. Diamond studs, composed posture, surrounded by executives who deferred when I spoke. He walked toward me slowly. Emily. His voice carried disbelief. Daniel. Neutral. Controlled. I heard you moved back home. He said carefully. I did. With your father. Yes. He studied me like he was solving a puzzle he hadn't realized existed. You never mentioned... He gestured vaguely. This. I never mentioned a lot of things. A flicker of irritation crossed his face. You could have told me, he said. Told you what? I asked calmly. That you were... connected. Connected. That was the word he chose. Not wealthy, not powerful. Connected. You never asked, I replied. Silence hung between us. In that moment, I saw it. The realization forming behind his eyes. The pieces clicking together. Carter, Global Holdings, the minority stakes, the layered subsidiaries. His breathing shifted slightly. Does your father... He hesitated. Does he hold positions in Harper? I met his gaze steadily. Carter Global holds positions in many companies. That's not what I asked. And that's the only answer you're getting tonight. His jaw tightened. You're enjoying this. No, I said quietly. I'm observing it. That hit harder than anger ever could. He leaned closer. I can fix this, he said almost to himself. It's temporary volatility. Markets don't punish volatility, I replied softly. They punish arrogance. His eyes flashed. You think I'm arrogant? I think you stopped listening. That ended the conversation. But it didn't end the spiral. Over the next month, Harper Technologies entered full crisis mode. Credit rating downgraded. Share price down 37%. 2 board members resigned. Then came the inevitable. Emergency capital request. This time it wasn't indirect. A formal inquiry was sent to Carter Capital Ventures, our private investment arm. Subject line: Strategic Partnership Opportunity. I stared at the email for a long time. Daniel wasn't asking me. He was asking the institution, but he knew. He had to know. Victor entered my office again. They're requesting $600 million in exchange for convertible equity. Convertible equity, which meant if they defaulted, we would own controlling shares. Daniel was offering his company to survive. My father called me into his office that evening. No pressure, he said calmly. This is business. But it wasn't just business. It was history. Memory, pride, hurt, love that once existed. If we refuse, I asked quietly, how long does he have? My father didn't hesitate. 90 days, maybe less. And there it was. The crossroads. I could approve the deal, secure controlling interest, save his company but take his power. Or I could decline, and watch everything he built collapse under its own weight. My father studied me carefully. This is not about revenge, he said. I know. It's about consequence. I nodded slowly. Because for the first time since signing those papers, I understood something clearly. Daniel hadn't lost his company yet. He had lost perspective. And the man who once told me I would regret leaving was about to learn what it feels like to kneel. Not in love, not in reconciliation, but in desperation. The decision would be mine. And this time, I wasn't signing away anything. I was choosing what happens next. I didn't answer the email for 48 hours. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because I needed to be certain I wasn't acting from memory, or resentment, or ego. Daniel had built Harper Technologies with fire in his chest and ambition in his veins. I had loved that fire once. I had admired it. But fire without discipline burns everything, including the person holding the match. Victor stood in my office again on the second morning. "Their liquidity window is closing faster than projected," he said. "Two banks are preparing to freeze extensions." "How public?" I asked. "Not yet, but rumors are spreading." I walked to the window overlooking the ocean. "Prepare a counteroffer." Victor didn't move. "Hostile?" "No," I said calmly. "Precise." That afternoon, Carter Capital sent a formal response. $600 million approved, in exchange for 51% controlling equity, immediate restructuring authority, board reformation, executive oversight. Daniel would remain CEO, under supervision. It wasn't mercy, it wasn't cruelty. It was control. The response came within 3 hours. He wanted to meet in person. Of course he did. We chose neutral ground, a private conference room at an executive hotel downtown. When I walked in, he was already there. No designer suit this time. No polished confidence. Just exhaustion hidden behind discipline. "You're asking for my company," he said without greeting. "I'm offering to save it. At the cost of everything I built." I held his gaze. "You already risked everything you built." His jaw tightened. "You could have warned me." I almost smiled. "You didn't listen when I was your wife. Why would you listen now?" That landed. He paced once across the room. "You think this is karma?" "No," I said quietly. "This is math." Silence filled the space. He looked at me differently now. Not dismissive, not superior. Evaluating. "You knew?" he said slowly. "You knew this would happen." I knew overexpansion funded by variable debt in a tightening market would collapse. "You sound like you wanted it to." "I sound like someone who reads financial reports." His shoulders lowered slightly. "This isn't just business to you." "You're right," I admitted. "It's not." He stopped pacing. "Then what is it?" "It's consequence." The word hung in the air. He stared at the proposal document. "If I refuse?" "You have maybe 2 months." "And if I accept?" "You keep your company, you keep your employees, you keep your name attached to it." "But I lose control." "Yes." He laughed once, hollow. "You always hated how much I valued control." "No," I corrected softly. "I hated that you valued it more than respect." That silenced him. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then he asked the question I knew was coming. "Why are you doing this?" It wasn't accusatory. It was genuine. "You're not vindictive," he said. "If you wanted to destroy me, you could." I didn't deny it. Because it was true. Through layered holdings, silent leverage, and market pressure, Carter Global could accelerate his collapse in under 30 days. But I hadn't. "Because hundreds of employees will suffer if you fall," I said. "And they didn't divorce me." He exhaled slowly. "And me?" I met his eyes directly. "You chose your path." He picked up the pen. The same type of pen I had used months earlier. "How ironic," he muttered. "Yes," I agreed. When he signed, he didn't look at me. He looked at the paper. At the numbers. At the transfer of power. And in that moment, something shifted in him. Not just ownership. Humility. The deal was executed within 48 hours. Press release. Carter Capital acquires majority stake in Harper Technologies. Strategic Stabilization Initiative announced. Stock surged 19% overnight. Employees kept their jobs. Investors regained confidence. And Daniel Harper, the man who once believed he needed no one, now answered to a board chaired by me. But control is not the same as victory. Because 6 months later, the market tightened again. Energy subsidies were cut. Global supply chains constricted. Even with restructuring, Harper Technologies was fragile. And this time, Daniel couldn't blame arrogance. He had learned. He had adapted. But the storm was bigger than both of us. When the second collapse came, it wasn't dramatic. It was slow. Revenue dips, delayed contracts, missed projections. Then one brutal quarter that triggered liquidation clauses we couldn't legally avoid. Carter Capital absorbed what we could, but Harper Technologies filed for bankruptcy. The headlines were merciless. From Rising Star to Corporate Casualty, Harper Empire falls. Despite Carter intervention, I watched the news in silence, not triumphant, not satisfied, just aware. Because this wasn't revenge fulfilled. It was reality unfolding. 3 weeks later, on a cold evening, my estate security called. "There's someone at the gate asking to see you." "Who?" A pause. "Mr. Daniel Harper." I froze. "He says it's personal." The irony wasn't lost on me. Months ago, he had sat in a glass office telling me I would regret leaving. Now he was standing at my gate, bankrupt, stripped of control, stripped of power, and asking to come in. I told security to let him through. When he stepped out of the car, he looked nothing like the man who signed those divorce papers. No arrogance, no certainty, just exhaustion. And something else. Vulnerability. He walked up the stone steps slowly. When he reached the door, he didn't speak immediately. He just looked at me, and then he lowered himself to his knees, not dramatically, not theatrically, but deliberately. "I was wrong," he said. "Not about the company, not about the deal, about us." The ocean wind carried silence between us, and for the first time since signing that divorce. The decision wasn't about money. It wasn't about power. It was about whether a man who had lost everything deserved another chance, and whether a woman who had returned to billions still believed in love. When Daniel knelt, it wasn't theatrical. There were no tears streaming down his face, no dramatic declarations meant for an audience, just a man who had finally run out of places to stand. The wind moved through the trees behind him. The gates closed softly in the distance. He looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, internally. "I don't want your money," he said quietly. "I don't want your company. I don't want your influence." His voice cracked slightly. "I want my wife back." Wife. The word felt foreign now. I didn't move. "Stand up," I said calmly. He hesitated. "I'm not kneeling for sympathy." "Then don't," I replied evenly. After a moment, he rose to his feet. Up close, I could see it clearly. He had aged. Failure does that. Not the financial kind, the personal kind. "You didn't come here just to apologize," I said. "No." "Then why are you here?" He exhaled slowly. "Because when everything collapsed, when the board meetings ended, when the lawyers stopped calling, I went home." His jaw tightened. And there was nothing there. The house he had kept in the divorce was large, modern, perfectly staged, empty. "I realized something," he continued. "I didn't lose my company when the bankruptcy papers were filed." His eyes met mine. "I lost it when I stopped listening to you." Silence stretched between us again. "I thought success meant proving I didn't need anyone," he said. "I thought dominance meant strength." And now? I asked. Now I know strength is building something with someone, not over them. Those words would have satisfied me once, years ago. But love cannot survive on apologies alone. You humiliated me, I said quietly. You let your mother serve me divorce papers at my own birthday dinner. His face tightened with shame. I know. You watched and said nothing. I thought it made me powerful, he admitted, like I was in control. And now you're at my door. Yes. No excuses. No deflection. That mattered more than he understood. What do you want from me? I asked carefully. A chance to earn back respect, he said. Not forgiveness, not marriage tomorrow, just the opportunity to prove I can be different. Different. It's easy to promise change when you've lost everything. It's harder to demonstrate it when pride returns. You don't have a company, I said. You don't have capital. You don't have leverage. I know. So who are you without it? That question hit him harder than any accusation. He didn't answer immediately, because for the first time in his adult life, he didn't have a title to hide behind. I don't know yet, he admitted. Honest, painfully honest, and that was new. I stepped aside slightly. Come inside. He looked surprised. This isn't acceptance, I clarified. It's a conversation. Inside, the house was warm, quiet, composed. He stood in the living room, taking in the scale of it. You always belonged here, he said softly. No, I corrected. I always belonged wherever I chose to stand. We sat across from each other. Not as husband and wife, not as CEO and investor. As two people who had broken something. I won't rebuild Harper, he said. I don't want another empire. Then what do you want? To build something smaller, he replied. Sustainable energy consulting. No debt-fueled expansion. No ego-driven acquisitions. He almost smiled faintly. And this time, I'd like a partner who challenges me. I studied him carefully. You had that. I know. Another silence. Different this time. Less sharp, more reflective. You understand, I said slowly, that if we try again, it won't be the same. I don't want the same, he replied immediately. Good answer. But answers are easy. Time is the real test. I won't give you money, I said. I'm not asking. I won't invest. I'm not here for investment. You will rebuild on your own. Yes. And if you succeed? He looked at me steadily. Then I'll come back not as a man who needs saving, but as a man who stands beside you. There it was. Not desperation, aspiration. For the first time since the divorce, I didn't see the man who underestimated me. I saw someone stripped of illusion. Stay for dinner, I said. His eyes softened. We didn't discuss reconciliation. We didn't discuss remarriage. We talked about lessons, about mistakes, about ego, about loneliness. He left that night without promises, just possibility. Over the next year, Daniel started over. Small office, 2 partners, no headlines, no flashy announcements, just disciplined work. He didn't call me every day. He didn't show up uninvited. He respected space. That mattered more than grand gestures. I watched quietly. Not interfering. Not rescuing. And slowly something unexpected happened. He built something real. Modest profits. Stable contracts. Measured growth. And when the first year closed in the black, he didn't throw a celebration party. He came to my door. Not kneeling. Standing. I did it, he said simply. No arrogance, no demand, just pride, earned honestly. This time, when I invited him in, it wasn't as a test. It was as a woman who had learned that power doesn't diminish love. And love doesn't require surrender. Months later, when he asked if we could try again, there were no diamond rings on a grand staircase, no dramatic spectacle, just two signatures, equal, balanced, conscious. Because this time, I wasn't signing away myself, and he wasn't building above me. We were building beside each other. And the difference between those two things is everything. People think the story ends when the man kneels, or when the woman forgives, or when the papers are signed again. But real endings are quieter than that. They happen in the ordinary mornings that follow. The first morning Daniel stayed over again. It wasn't dramatic. No champagne, no declarations. He woke up early, out of habit, and stood by the window overlooking the ocean. I watched him from the bed. He didn't look like the man who once measured his worth by market capitalization. He looked steady. That was new. "You're thinking," I said softly. "I'm calculating tide patterns," he replied with a faint smile. "Old habits." I laughed, but he turned serious. "I used to wake up calculating competitors, expansion, threats. And now? Now I calculate risk differently." He looked back at me. "I calculate what I could lose." That was the shift. Not fear of poverty, fear of disconnection. Rebuilding a marriage is stranger than building a company. There's no quarterly report, no clean metric, just consistency. Daniel kept his consulting firm intentionally small, sustainable, profitable, but never overextended. When investors approached him with aggressive growth offers, he declined. Once over dinner, I asked why. He shrugged. "I already know what happens when I chase scale for validation." And what happens? I lose perspective. He didn't look ashamed when he said it, just aware. Awareness is heavier than shame. Shame hides, awareness adjusts. One evening, months later, we attended a private finance gala, the same type of event where he once dismissed me. This time, introductions sounded different. Emily Carter, chair of Carter Global, and Daniel Harper, founder of Harper Sustainable Advisory. Founder. Not CEO of an empire, not market disruptor, just founder. Intentional, grounded. At one point, an old acquaintance of his approached. "I heard Carter basically saved you before the bankruptcy," the man said with a smirk. Old Daniel would have bristled, deflected, asserted dominance. New Daniel smiled calmly. "They gave me a chance to learn," he replied. "And now?" "Now I build smarter." No defensiveness, no ego spike, just truth. Later that night in the car, I glanced at him. "You didn't correct him." "There was nothing to correct." "You don't feel diminished?" He looked genuinely confused. "By growth?" I realized then. The man who once needed superiority to breathe, now valued stability more than applause. But love isn't proven at galas, it's proven in conflict. And conflict came. A year into reconciliation, a major international firm offered Daniel a partnership that would multiply his revenue fivefold. Aggressive expansion, global exposure, high leverage, high reward, high risk. I didn't tell him what to do. I simply asked one question. "Why do you want it?" He didn't answer immediately. That worried me. For 3 days, he analyzed projections, met advisors, ran scenarios. Finally, he came home late one evening, quiet. "I declined," he said. "Because of me?" I asked carefully. "No," he replied, "because of me." That mattered more than the decision itself. "I don't want to rebuild something that requires me to disappear again," he added. Disappear. That was the word. Not fail, not collapse, disappear. That's what ego does. It consumes presence. 2 years after the bankruptcy, Harper Sustainable Advisory was thriving. Not exploding. Thriving. Measured growth. strong margins, ethical contracts. Meanwhile, Carter Global continued expanding across sectors, and for the first time in our history, our success didn't compete, it complemented. We collaborated on a mid-sized renewable project once. Professional, equal. No tension. At the signing ceremony, someone jokingly asked, "So who's really in charge at home?" Daniel answered without hesitation, "We are." And there was no irony in his voice.